everybody, it's Steve Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today is kind of an in-between sort of day. I know we have a very important meeting coming up on Thursday that Wayne's going to be conducting for us. In fact, in a couple of minutes, Wayne, I'll give you a heads up and I'll let you do a little intro of what you have planned there. And so today is kind of like a standalone day, and I thought I could either use it to answer whatever questions you guys have, in which case I'd be honoring that whole pay attention to tension sort of belief we hold near and dear. But I also have a couple of, I'm going to call them mini models that I've stumbled across, and I thought I'll throw up the graphic, see if you guys think it overlays. And then the bigger question of all is, do you think it merits being integrated? Is it brilliant? You know, what will you bestow upon it as far as honors and accolades kind of go? So we can do a little bit of both of those sorts of things. But ultimately, it's just a day between because we've got Wayne coming up on Thursday. I didn't want to start a brand new, longer term subject, you know, knowing that he's already got Thursday planned. So Wayne, you want to tell everybody what you got planned for our Thursday talk?
Yeah, in the same vein as your merging of brilliance over the years, I've realized that I have a handful of models that I just keep coming back to and intertwine together beautifully and support one another. And the bonus of they're all super applicable in the remote sense of things, as opposed to, I mean, they work just as well face to face, but they really support the work that I do remotely.
That's
So.
wonderful, wonderful. And so I think what I'm going to do, assuming I don't run out of energy, bandwidth, etc., I think I might want to actually record Thursday's session as a tea time event rather than as part of the Circle of Brilliance, because I have a different mailing list that I use when I'm announcing a new tea time thing going up. And I think we'd have a broader audience for that. Also, so everyone else kind of knows, if you'd like to be featured in a little tea time recording, that would be really great to do. I'm always open to doing that. It's a simple conversation of the two of us on camera, on Zoom, side by side, chatting about whatever you'd like to chat about. But ultimately, I think that if you are attending Wayne's presentation on Thursday, you'll get the feel for what it is I'd like tea time to actually be. Okay, and then Shags posed a question. When the time change occurs in early November, will the time for the shift? What I've learned over the years is that it's much easier for me to shift things here than it is for the rest of the planet. To figure out how to adjust to Arizona time. We thought that because Arizona doesn't change time, that we'd have life being a lot easier. It's the opposite. Things are far more challenging for us because we have to either adjust and throw whatever our normal routine is into a shift, or we have to make everybody else shift. And so there you go. We're in the minority, we shift. So it shouldn't affect what you guys have grown accustomed to at all. All right, so yeah, so again, I said I'd like to open it up just to questions so I can pay attention to tension. Does anyone have any questions, comments, observations they'd like to share about anything we've been discussing for these past mini Circle of Brilliance sorts of things? Or shall I move into our mini projects? What do you guys think? Anybody? Questions? Or Shags? There's a whole busload of you now. All right, silence means I can move on to something. So,
Go for it. It's your show.
yeah, is that the way it works? I kind of think it's a circle, so no head table. All right, there's a couple little things I stumbled across as I was sorting through other things. It had to do with attachment. And so I'm going to slide a couple of attachment styles, things into the screen. And I'm curious to know if you guys have any familiarity with this. That might be, that's the same model. They're just using a few different identifiers. So we'll take a look at these to begin with. And I've got a few more related to this with perhaps a little bit different thing. Anyone on the call familiar with whatever this attachment style sort of thing? Is it about relationship coaching, therapy? What is this? Anybody? No, first timers? We're all seeing this for the first time?
I know I've seen it, but I can't speak to it other
Yeah,
than
yeah.
in, that's it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I knew it kind of existed, but I didn't know where it existed. So let's kind of look at what it is at face value. And our goal is to always figure out, first of all, I think, does it tend to resonate with what we already feel is happening as we look at other kinds of these models? We're looking at quadrants. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say, if this overlays, it's going to overlay on the quadrants as we know them, which means one of these four is going to be more of a driver energy, one's going to be more expressive, one's going to be more amiable, and one's going to be more analytical. The expressive and the analytical should be opposite one another, and the driver and the amiable should be opposite one another. We may need to rotate it, we may need to do a mirror image flip, but that's what this all looks like. So is there anything that you kind of see about these four? The immediate says, well, that one definitely plots where? Anybody have any thoughts? Secure, anxious, avoidant, dismissive, and avoidant, fearful. Before we get into what those might mean, any vibe you instantly feel? All right, no, not so much. Okay, I'll tell you that for me, I see the word anxious. And when I think about someone being anxious, does that feel more upgrid or downgrid? Y'all unmute yourselves, participate with T today. Is this more upgrade or downgrade? Anxious. Definitely feels more upgrade to me. Now that would mean that avoidant dismissive would be downgrade. Let's for a moment look and see what that says there. Downplays importance of relationships. Obviously, at least this individual, whoever Sylvie Hookasian is, Sylvie K. Hookasian, Sylvie Hookasian. Don't know, but anyway, obviously involved in relationship work. So is usually extremely self-reliant, can become more vulnerable when there is a big crisis. Does that feel relatively downgrid, waiting for something, taking care of oneself? Yeah, I'd say it kind of has that vibe. Anybody agree, disagree? No. And then we have secure and avoidant, fearful. So if I'm avoidant dismissive, and that's downgrade, then avoidant fearful either has to be relatively amiable, in which case secure would be relatively outgrid, or the other way around. So when I read secure, can trust fairly easily, is attuned to emotions, can communicate upsets directly, leads with cooperative and flexible behavior in relationships. Does that feel amiable? Does that feel more outgrid? Does that feel where? What do you guys think?
That feels in-grid to me.
Feels a
No,
little in-grid, yeah.
And grid, yes.
All right, because this is we're going about to see it.
I don't think secure feels in grid at all. I think secure feels like within just outside the green circle in amiable.
I wish, yeah. In which case, based on what you guys have observed, that it definitely feels on the amiable side of things. But to Kathy's point, it feels a little bit more on the outgrid side of amiable.
I mean, is it leads, communicates directly, leads with cooperative behavior and relation?
Right. So could this be then an amiable driver? No, sorry, a driven amiable?
Yeah, that's what I see it as.
Driven amiable, in which case the anxious would be an expressive amiable. And this would be an analytical amiable, and avoidant fearful, more dependent in relationships than avoidant, dismissive, strongly fears rejection, has low self-esteem, has high anxiety in relationships.
That's more in-grid. That's over on the other side, I think.
That would be in-grid. So this would be amiable. More dependent in relationships than avoidant, dismissive. That would hold true, yes. It may not really be true, but I believe that's their perception. Strongly fears rejection. Not entirely sure about that, only because they don't want any attention brought to them. The further in-grid you go, the in-grid danger zone would want to. wouldn't really care about whether they were accepted or not as long as they weren't punished in any sort of way. Maybe that's, I don't know, I'd have to look at that. Has low self-esteem, that feels absolutely right. Has high anxiety in relationships, that feels absolutely right. So, all right. So far is this kind of interesting, but it doesn't seem to resonate completely yet. Yeah, we're all right with this? You guys, all right. So quiet as agreement. So obviously I said, well, this one is using the same secure, anxious, preoccupied, dismissive, avoidant, and fearful, avoidant. So they've done something very much to modify anxious at the very least, adding this preoccupied sort of thing to it. So emotional hunger, fantasy bond, lack of nurturing, and turbulence. All right, and then down the okay, yeah, we would go ahead, Kathy.
I would just say that that strikes me as expressive, but
Yeah.
The expressive side of amiable,
Yeah.
it's not quite danger zone, but it's getting close to.
Yeah. Yeah, it's touching upon it. I'll, by the way, I'll bring up that change grid layer in just a second. Just if we look at what they said about secure, confident, reciprocal, non-reactive, and resilient. Well, those are four very healthy things. And so to Kathy's point, that feels like it's inside of the green circle on the amiable side of things. You guys agree with that? Kathy, does that resonate with what your thought was there?
Yeah, absolutely. You know,
Yeah.
it comes close to the, the outgrid
Yeah.
expression of
Right. It's like confident, but I think it's a quiet internal confidence which is why I like secure. There's no bravado associated with this. We're confidence where we're talking about. You'd have to be outgrid to really, be that way. So I think you're right. This could be in grid. This would be upgrid. That means this has to be, I'm sorry, secure is the driven amiable. This would be the expressive amiable. Over here, fearful avoidant would have to be the amiable, perhaps in a danger zone, maybe with any luck, not at all. Fearful avoidant, internal conflict. Yes, dramatic. I think they might be feeling all kinds of internal drama and working very hard to diminish any kind of external drama. Unpredictable. They might be feeling that they're in an unpredictable environment. So supporting their retreat, or there's an unpredictability in the relationships, which could be hot or cold, good or bad, violent or negligent the next day. So it could be that. So ambivalent, kind of an accepting of the reality of the situation. And again, ambivalence perhaps as a coping mechanism, because it could be dangerous to really care or get involved. All right, again, I think I've been describing an in-grid danger zone. Are you guys in agreement with me on that? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a terrible place, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ugh. Yeah, again, these people generally don't become our clients. So but we know they're there, and maybe we stumble across one, or there's been one in our personal or private lives, but
Well, it's interesting because they're talking about attachment styles, and the whole notion of attachment is one where we all attach, we all attach, and we learn how to attach as babies. But it's about then being able to learn how to be on our own. So the
right.
attachment styles primarily talk about dysfunctional attachment, I think. I mean, I don't know if that was the purpose of this, but there's only one of them that's not.
Yeah, and truly everyone, I was looking for something else when I stumbled across this, and they always seem to be involved in some kind of relationship therapy. One of them, I think, was a social worker. One was someone who dealt with women's crisis centers. One was some kind of an interventionist. So I think they were probably working a lot with these people in this goldenrod lower right quadrant here. So it seemed like it always had to do with relationships. And that would make sense because this doesn't seem to be talking about attachment to things or attachment to situations or attachment to some illusion one might hold about themselves. I think they're talking about real attachment to another human being in whatever forms those relationships may take. Yeah. Anyway, that would leave then the dismissive avoidant as being the analytical amiable. An analytical amiable is primarily living down in power, apathy, and apathy. So I can understand the dismissive part. Isolation. If they feel isolated, it's of their choosing. Ambiguous. I think they're very comfortable with ambiguity. I don't think they think any of it's kind of mattered. So again, I'm trying to put myself into the energy of an analytical amiable. It's like I can kind of understand, I can observe everything that's going on around me and I can kind of see, but here it is, I'm emotionally distant, but I'm not detached like I would be in the actual center of the change grid. I think this is something else. Oh, Tim chatted over. This actually comes from positive psychology. Tim, feel free to unmute. Was this the same model that we're looking at, or is it? Did you find a third model?
Um, there seems to be some slight differences, but I just came across this on the call, so I'm trying to do the comparison thing there, and it seems that it started with you know, an examination of the relationship between monkeys and you know, and just trying to look at for you know, the chimps, what would that look like from a behavioral standpoint if they were.
And so they're thinking there's some sort of primal element that's coming on to all this, or, you know, with all due respect to members of the chimpanzee family, you know, I understand.
Yeah, but it did evolve into looking at it from an adult perspective, which is, I think, what you have here, and looking particularly at adult relationships.
Interesting.
And
all right, so then, it would seem to then overlay on the amiable general energy block on the change grid itself. Which I
just here, according to my psychology friends, psychologist friends, attachment theory is a big thing in psychology and counseling and that type of thing. So yeah.
Right, and so that would mean that they're working with an individual and how that individual is interacting with other individuals in one way, shape, or form. So right there, we know that another person has to be involved. The four energies on the change grid are either going to be leading primarily towards relationships or primarily towards tasks. So without turning this into a review of comparative human typological analysis, anyone remember what the two more people-oriented energies were and the two more task-oriented energies?
Well, and that's where I find it interesting when we look at its application to the change grid, because I don't see all four of the styles on the grid being. I'm looking for the comparison with this because, you know, when I think about the energy that we talk about with the grid, they don't all necessarily, in my opinion, have a strong relationship to relationships.
Right, and that's the main point. Yeah, that's the key point, because we have to understand that that first of all, you're going to be talking about a relationship. People are involved. The two people-oriented quadrants are in-grid and up-grid. So it's the amiable energy that comes to relationships from a caring perspective, and expressive energy that comes to relationships from an excitement and experiential sort of thing. Out-grid people and down-grid people tend to be far more task-oriented, which ends up causing problems in the relationships.
Right.
So they're quite distant from it. And so I don't think that any of these attachment styles would resonate with someone being in a highly competitive test sort of a situation. that's an outgrid kind of thing. And this isn't about being that far outgrid. This is just going to do that. So I think what the people who have done deep dives into attachment styles, I think what they're really doing a deep dive into is the amiable energy, the aspect of human existence that involves other humans. And that tends to be more on the in-grid side of thing. And obviously problems spill out others. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, how good is an expressive expressive when it comes to relationships? You know, um, how good's a driven driver going to be? How good is an analytical going to be? It's just not where healthy relationships live. I also don't think a healthy relationship lives with an amiable, which is why I think this focus on avoidant fearful is so important, and doesn't surprise me then that people who are of the licensed psychology professionals, whatever, deal with those kinds of people, those kinds of situations. I'm just saying in our world as corporate consultants and, general kinds of coaches, we don't tend to deal with people that are this, I mean, they could be a danger. They could be in true danger, even if they're in no true danger. Holding this belief, this perception about the world around them is going to be very dangerous to them, and spill another thing. So there's a great deal of work available to any human being who wants to go through this kind of focused training. You with me? On it.
If I can comment here, T, the experience I have had and others have had with coaching is that in a corporate setting, if you're coaching executives, more likely you're going to run into the avoidant dismissive style as dysfunctional and creating issues in the workplace.
Absolutely. In fact, yeah, go ahead, Kathy. I'm going to bring up a diagram. So.
No, it's okay. I just want to say, but that is, especially with analytics, that is going to be something that will then create problems for people as they're trying to connect to their direct reports, as they're trying to connect with their peers. It might show up more in technical and medical and, other types of fields where you have people leading, but have some issues and tend to be more downward.
Right, you're exactly right. So again, we have to isolate the discussion to the discussion about relationships or interpersonal sorts of things, as Kathy's pointing out. Well, if we said that the model that we're looking at overlays in such a way that that energy would be the analytical amiable, think about what an analytical amiable is really experiencing. So they're primarily amiable, which is like they're pleasant enough and they want to get along with people, and they like people, they're likable or whatever, but they're not highly invested. If I look at the layer of attention they're experiencing, most of that energy is going to be apathy and power apathy. So again, it's like right here. That's apathy and power apathy. Right there, does that bode well for the development and strengthening of relationships in a corporate kind of setting? No. And then, if we add to it, how about their intensity? They've got second degree intensity to primary, first degree. They're just not very intense about it. So they're not putting very much energy into it at all. They believe that even though their ability is only moderate, actually it's on the low end of moderately low, moderate low to low moderate, that the challenge just isn't there. So they know enough. And because that analytical driver energy is what's kind of running the ship, they're kind of convincing themselves using that analytical skill to show that sufficient evidence has been brought forth that no further thought or discussion needs to be held on the subject. So, Kathy, does that resonate with what might lead to problems?
No, absolutely. That's perfect. And I've had, I've certainly worked with and coached leaders like that.
Right. And it's like we want to put them through a training class, but the training class is going to turn them from an analytical amiable to an amiable analytical.
Right.
We've just made a bad situation worse.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why we said that all training has to be accompanied by an increased expectation of performance. Otherwise, we know that training as a standalone thing is a downgrade maneuver. Right? Because what does training do? Normalizes, simplifies, add resources, restore resources. Training is a whopper downgrade maneuver. But if it is counterbalanced by an increased expectation for performance, now maybe we can do something. So we can say, hey, executives, yes, you're going through a training program. It's because we're going to have a new set of performance standards, a new set of analyticals we're going to be monitoring, a new expectation as far as how we want to be able to see you interacting with other people. Otherwise, what do you think is going to happen, everybody? They're going to come to the class begrudgingly. They're going to be terrible, distracted students. Well, they're going to be avoidant dismissive because we're in a relationship when the training class is happening. They're going to downplay the importance of the relationship. They believe they already know enough. Number two, extremely self-reliant. They're going to believe they already know plenty. They can become vulnerable if there's a crisis. Because again, if we've had one of these classes, you know that sometimes we can do an exercise that allows a person who's been holding back their personal truth to express that personal truth. And that personal truth could expose a certain vulnerability. But I need to point out to you that the moment that discussion happens, they're not an avoidant dismissive anymore. Now they've moved up to an anxious. So a sensitive nervous system struggles communicating needs directly, tends to act out when triggered. That's what they're going to kind of do to counterbalance that, to fight against it. Because now, by the way, that expressive amiable energy is primarily in stress and power stress. So definitely I'm going to see that stress response dictate. And why? They perceive their ability as being nowhere near what it needs to be to meet the challenge. They may not be very far upgrade, outgrade, or downgrade, but it's the ratio we're looking at. Perceived ability to perceive challenge. If they're right here, they still believe the challenge is 5 times what their perceived ability is. So yeah, you're going to get a stress response from them. Okay, anyway, does that resonate for people? Or does that give you a little more, perhaps, evidence of where it lands on the change grid?
And T, can I ask Kathy a question?
Yeah, of course.
Based on the comment, and I agree with you, Kathy, when you talked about the coaching at the executive level, what would you attribute those behaviors to? Is there anything that you're noticing in your work that contributes?
Well, I mean, the big, when I first started years and years ago doing work for Towers Perrin, when it was Towers Perrin at the beginning of my career, doing competency modeling, one of the first things that we had to figure out was the notion of empathy. They wanted leaders and consultants who had empathy, and so there was did a lot of research on, can empathy be learned? So when you look at all of this, the avoidant dismissive and then the anxious, moving back and forth between those quadrants, a lot of it has to do with an individual's ability to access empathy if they have it, if they're even capable of doing it. And so that's a big part of moving into a secure or more amiable model is literally that. I wouldn't call it, but it's a trait of empathy. Able to connect with that, and so that's what I would have to say about that. And you can't teach someone empathy. You can help them understand why not having it is going to hurt them over time. And you can coach them into finding ways to helping them access whatever empathy they have. But it's an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. This type of personality is an extraordinarily difficult type of personality to coach.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think that that's a part of the selection process of how folks are identified to assume those roles. And for years, the lack of focus on what Kathy just expressed, I think, has contributed to leaders not being successful, because I think in the process of ignoring that, or not valuing it, I should say, persons were selected into leadership roles that did not have that strength or that value that would have allowed them to lead people to points of success.
And a lot of that happens, Tim, when you have highly intelligent, technically competent people like doctors and engineers and, research scientists and tech, IT people being moved into positions of leadership.
Yes.
They were selected for their incredible technical skills and analytics. Moved into other positions, and all of a sudden you have a problem where, oh my God, how do we manage a leadership role now, and how can we make this person do something?
Now, and add to that one of the reasons why this individual is being rewarded with that promotion or that increased opportunity is because they are showing themselves to be two things that whoever is promoting them values. Number one, they are viewed as being a friendly person. So they're an amiable, or rather an analytical amiable. So they're pleasant enough to get along with. Again, they're going to be, which one, dismissive. They might downplay it, and they're very self-reliant. So they can be pleasant enough. They can be viewed because of self-reliance, as being very capable. And so if you can hand me someone on my team who I view as being capable and pleasant enough, maybe, just maybe, I can put them in a position where they can be, well, look, the word here is administrative, in an administrative position that may lead to some sort of management, leadership, kind of formal sort of a thing. So maybe that helps explain the dynamic of how that individual now got pulled into a place where they're going to find uncomfortable. But let me just point out to you that something else that Kathy observed earlier on is that the secure one is on the driven, amiable side of things. Keep in mind that, well, what is that? 4 out of the 9 squares, so almost half, I'll give it half of the secure style is inside of the green circle. So this is a very healthy, amiable person who understands a good blend between being helpful and being a good follower and being a good administrator. This is where good things are basically happening, but some little things are starting to happen. So I'm sure they rose to the occasion for a little while, but did they stay there, or did they go like, no, not much challenge, and dropped back down to this dismissive sort of place?
T, I have a question for you. And not wanting to derail the conversation, so if this is off topic, let me know. But there's this discussion that's going on lately about what we'll call quiet quitting, right? And it's probably more relevant to middle and lower management folks than it is to leadership positions, although I'm sure it can exist there as well. And these avoidant, dismissive individuals you're describing sound like the perfect candidate for that.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And by the way, I do think what you're talking about is on topic. I mean, this is a relationship that people have with their coworkers, a relationship they have with their, company as an entity, whatever, or how they're vibing with the mission and the vision and the purpose and the culture and all that. I think there is a relationship that's going on. And that individual, to your point, and by the way, only half of this administrator slice is on that side of thing. The other half is going to be that analytical, amiable analytical. So again, it's just the worst side of what's going on. It's all happening here. So it's still a relationship going on. Well, do they downplay the importance of the relationships that one has when they physically go to an office? Hell yeah. Do they downplay the importance of a lot of the people that beforehand they had to interact with every day? Apparently those meetings are optional or whatever. They're self-reliant, so they don't have any need to go in. I don't know about the third point they're making, become vulnerable when there is a crisis. I'm sure they can become a great excuse factory. But ambivalent, emotionally distant, isolated, I think you're spot on right. This is where the world of quiet quitting probably finds as a bit of a home. Yeah.
And I think that people move into that anxious area when they're being, at least their perception is
Mhm.
they're being forced into the office as opposed to
Yeah.
working
Right.
remotely.
And so where would that put them now? That would put them, okay, anxious is straight up here. So now suddenly their ability is being questioned, and maybe they're the ones that are questioning their ability based on some of the arguments that management is putting forth. They do see the challenges being much higher than they perceive their ability to meet. And so this is where they're probably going to, I don't know, try to find comrades in the cause, try to build the case about why they're actually doing better work for you remotely than they were even doing online. You know, I mean, I can see how they'd fight for their cause.
Yeah.
But yeah, now, if this situation is handled well, then good things will happen. But if it's not handled well, then they're going to move up to an energizer and do something much more reactive. Likewise, the administrator left alone is just going to move further down grid, become far more complacent and ambivalent and physically tired and mentally unavailable or uninvolved. So yeah, now so again, kind of bringing this to our little tests we put forth for the circle of brilliance, do we find this concept at least to be something that does resonate with the change grid as we know it? The answer is I think so. Does it cover the whole change grid? Obviously not. We think it is really tasked far more to the in-grid side of things. Do we think that this contributes something to our understanding of that area of the change grid that moves us to bestow the label of brilliant upon it? What do you guys think? Anybody want to weigh in on it?
I'm not sure I understand your question, T.
Well, I'm just saying, like, it's very, okay, it's really good, but when we're now adding something to the change grid, we want to know that what we're adding is the unique brilliance that this model is bringing to our discussion or understanding of that particular area of the change grid. It's contributing something that we may very well find very useful. So how does that, do you think that fits, Kathy? Or
I absolutely do, because I think
do.
that we don't tend to deal with that part of the change grid.
Right.
And I think this lens sheds some light on it that I think is
Yeah.
to us. And
No,
understand that we might actually be spending more time on it than we think.
well, I think you're absolutely right. And maybe it's because we might be the dismissive, avoidant, or whatever, and just say, well, in fact, I never cease to be amused by people who believe the change management is about things like policies, procedures, structures, operations. It's like, oh, you're clueless. Because the moment any of that precious strategy gets put in the hands of real people, then the real work of change can begin. So that's all your model, all this outcome you're describing just tells me what the desired outcome is of the change process. It's not the change process itself. I just laugh at that, going like, oh, you guys are just marching into a real problem that's going to show you how questionable the value of everything you've done up to now actually is. If you guys
See, I think particularly when we're looking at the activity list and when that activity very clearly speaks to relationships with others, I think this then becomes very applicable.
Yeah, I think so. So I do believe it merits the label of brilliant. So it adds something to our understanding of the change grid. It probably adds some specific adjectives to the map that I think that could be interesting. I do believe that how they're using ambivalence in the world of a avoidant dismissive, or rather a dismissive avoidant, is different than what they might mean by ambivalent, or how ambivalence might express itself in a fearful avoidant. But nevertheless, I can see a certain variety of ambivalences there. We can find an adjective that's more specific. Maybe ambivalent belongs somewhere, and there's a better word for what they mean by ambivalence in another area. So I think that's it. Now, it's also brilliant if we like to think that we have a bill to pay. If someone's going to add brilliance to our model, do you believe that understanding tension management, understanding the change grid may actually prove to be useful to people who hold this model near and dear to the work that they do and the population that they focus on? Could learning everything else we know about tension management be beneficial to them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so I think that these are certainly blendable. Do they earn their own layer on the change grid? I'm going to say no. I think it's just a deeper dive into what amiable really means, what amiable really focuses on. Yep.
Something that comes to mind is these are difficult people to work with and coach, in my opinion. And maybe that's one of the reasons why we don't, to Kathy's point, we don't spend much time on these people as we should. But what comes to mind is the old adage of either you change the people or you change the people. You know, it's easier to just change the people and not to deal with these types of individuals that fall into these four categories.
I love that. Yeah, I love it. Changing people is a lot easier than changing people. I like that. It's so true. It's so
but
true.
But I really do think we spend more time on them. I mean, you can't always choose. I try to make it a point not to coach people who are trying to be pushed out of the organization. I always try to work with people who are, are high flyers in some fashion. But at the same time, that doesn't always happen. And there are people who appear to be high flyers. And once you peel back the onion, this is a lot of what you're dealing with, because it is human nature to have attachment issues at some point. So I think we do deal with it a lot more than we think we do if we're doing any kind of deep coaching. Is my argument back.
I think you're right. I think you're right.
And understand this. Yeah.
It reminds me of a study that was done about educators who are providing primary education, like anything up to graduated from high school. And they were doing some sort of a study, I guess it's a longitudinal study, about where do people end up in their careers X number of years down the road if they are focused on some population that has special needs. Remedial is probably on a good day, what's going on. So that population that's focusing on special needs versus teachers who are focusing on gifted students. Who do you think ends up more highly regarded, higher paid, more whatever down the road? Which of those two teachers? What would you guess? Who won? Was it I
think our society would tend to reward those with the gift that more who deal with gifted
absolutely,
students.
Absolutely. Now, I'm
but
not saying
they're more valuable. It just
means.
No,
that's right. That to me is what the interesting point is. And this study was really all about exactly what you've just said, value. Why is it that we value the people who are doing gifted students work rather than people that are doing any sort of work with special needs? And one of the things that they said is that the other thing is that they forget that in many cases, the person who's dealing with special needs are in an environment that is threatening to the educator as well. So they do that. They don't seem to think that the work of someone who's working with special needs is actually far more difficult than what dealing with a gifted student, because for no other reason, the people that are working with gifted students are working with gifted students. So where the people that are working with special needs populations have to deal with those unique needs and how those needs express themselves and all of the emotional and behavioral issues that may come along with it. And so their work is harder. They are really exposing themselves to a much higher way, but we do not really consider them to be as valuable as the people that are working with gifted students. So I don't know what in what Kathy was saying that triggered that memory for me, but it definitely triggered this memory about how people that are trying to work with the population that is the struggling population are in the long run not going to receive the notice, the accolade, the credit, and the compensation that they really deserve.
Because society at large doesn't want to relate to that.
Right.
We don't want to admit that's part of us. So it's just part of saying, oh, we want to push those people aside. We want to keep them in the Tupperware.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, it's true. It's true. So, all right, I'm going to slide one more diagram. We got 15 minutes. I'm curious. Now, this one I kind of experienced in a different way, although it's still using the these 4 quadrants. But look what they've divided it into. You're a loner, you're cool, you're clingy, or you're a stalker. Now, I can't pass this one up. I think I'm looking at one that feels a little bit more like a way to raise the tension and cause problems in relationships on the right, versus one that's trying to find a healthy way to get people to understand and work better with one another. That being said, I would say to you that the loner would be which of the 4?
It's the analytical, the dismissive avoidant.
The dismissive avoidant. This is where they would be. I don't trust you. I'm better off alone. I don't know where this trust factor came in. Trust versus self-esteem. That alone could be an interesting thing to kind of parallel. And then stalker. You're too good for me. You would just end up hurting me anyway.
That's the fearful avoidant.
Fearful avoidant. And then clingy. I know I don't deserve you, but I depend on you so much. Well, right there, emotional hunger and a fantasy bond, which would leave secure and cool together. I love you and I know you love me. We rock. Well, don't you love them back? Okay, so it's all good. Yeah, somebody's on the receiving end of the fan. Okay. Now, I do think it's interesting that they've decided that only the cool one is secure. The other 3 are, if they're experiencing their own variety of insecurity. I don't necessarily disagree with that, because I do know that for those other 3, their power contribution is actually quite low. So that means that this insecurity for up here is more because the situation feels far more challenging than you can handle. And the insecurity here is probably more of a fear of having attention brought to you, because you're actually more of a master down here. You're in ambivalence, you're power apathy to apathy. It's just not very pronounced, but nevertheless, it's still there. Okay, Tim's chatted us something over here. Anxious preoccupied or anxious resistant attachment. Those who form less secure bonds with their partners may feel desperate for love or affection and feel their partner must complete them or fix their problems. While they long for safety and security in their romantic relationships, they may also be acting in ways that push their partner away rather than invite them in. The behavioral manifestations of their fears can include being clingy, all right, demanding, jealous, or easily upset by small issues. Oh, okay, they feel like a real handful, because
so that one would put them in that the clingy quadrant.
So they're this upgrade, kind of this expressive, amiable. That's clingy, and that would put the other one,
the cool.
The cool is definitely the driven, amiable. They're more matter of fact, they're more empowered by it, there's more confidence here, etc. And so that would resonate very much with the secure person. Confident, reciprocal, non-reactive, resilient. What other words we got?
Right.
They trust easily, they're attuned to emotions, they can communicate their upsets easily. So I think they're cool. They're cool about whatever's going on. And cool to me is more of an expression of readiness. I've got high self-esteem. I've got a high level of trust. So whatever it is, we can kind of deal with what's ever coming our way.
Right.
So this one does also overlay. I just don't appreciate the labels as much as I appreciate the more neutral, or more, what I want to say, avoidant fearful tells me a lot more than loner does. Loner tells me the most important thing is this person wants to be isolated and is avoiding people, etc. I don't really believe that's necessarily the case. I think they just want to stay focused on the task at hand, and they're perfectly mellow in their amiable, so they'll be pleasant enough, but they don't feel compelled to become more socially attached. They're there to get the job done, and they're happy to do it in a pleasant way. So now, can they be the loner and not trust anyone? Yeah, but I think we're talking about maybe outside of the red circle where things can become more problematic. Yeah. Okay, and then I'm going to slide one more diagram in just so I can show you the 4. This one I kind of feel like overlays on these, but needs to be rotated in a different kind of a way. So this one is from 2020, whatiscodependency.com. They are using the 4 labels we've been, or 3 of the 4: secure, fearful avoidant, dismissing avoidant, dismissive avoidant. And they're basically then using the scales: high avoidance versus low avoidance, low anxiety versus high anxiety. In order to get these to overlay the way they're describing them, I would have to do the same mirror flip, but I think I need to rotate it at 45 degrees. Because secure isn't half upgrid and half downgrid. Secure is pretty much what the healthy driver is experiencing. So we need to rotate this a bit more. But I do appreciate the idea that the 2 axes that they're looking at are not trust versus self-esteem, but is avoidance versus anxiety. Maybe anxiety. No, sorry, trust versus self-esteem, yeah, maps to anxiety and avoidance. All right, that might be worth looking at to get a little bit deeper, but what do you guys think? A good enough fill-in program before our program with Wayne on Thursday?
Yeah,
Good.
this was good.
All right, good. All right, so we will consider this to be in the realm of brilliance. I'll put it in its own folder. We'll see if we ever return to it. So with that, let's go ahead and end today. We'll talk to everybody come Thursday. So final questions, comments? All right, thanks everybody. Take care. We'll talk again soon. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.